So we've been looking, and you can't see the title because the gentry are in the way, so I'll move them. We've been looking at the challenges that Elizabeth faced when she first became queen. And we've already seen that when she became queen, there were significant financial problems and the crown owed a lot of money. There are long-term trends in the country that mean that there are quite a lot of economic problems for people as well, particularly the ordinary poor people. And then there are also religious problems, and there is religious instability. Now, as with economic instability, this gets a lot of attention later, so I don't want to go into too much detail about it now, really. I'll try and keep it brief. But if you recall, Elizabeth's father, Henry VIII, in the 1530s, broke the English Church away from the Roman Catholic Church and put himself in charge of it. And this is really popular with Protestants in the country, but it's not at all popular with the Catholics, and there are a lot of them. It causes wider social problems as well, because before this, the Catholic Church had run a lot of almshouses to look after poor people, and lazar houses to look after people with leprosy, and hospitals to look after the sick. And when Henry closes down the Roman Catholic institutions in the country, he closes down the monasteries, and in doing so, he closes down a lot of the provision for poor people. So that creates a wider social problem. When he dies, the crown goes to his son, Edward, but Edward is only young, so a lot of decisions are made by his advisors, and his advisors are Protestant. So they start to change the churches up and down the country in England to make them more Protestant and to change the way that people worship as well. So in 1549, some Catholics in Devon and Cornwall are so upset about this that they have a rebellion against it. It's called the Prayer Book Rebellion. Not a very good year for rebellions, really, 1549. Because they don't like the new English prayer book. And although that's defeated, it leads to 2,500 executions among the rebels. So that's fairly terrible as well. When Edward dies, the throne goes to Mary, who is a Catholic, who tries to change the church back to Catholic, and she tries to persuade all the Protestants in the country to change their beliefs. And this leads, because she uses some rather forceful methods to do this, this ends up becoming known as the Marian persecution. And it sees some fairly horrible things. Most famously, Mary burns to death 283, if we're going to be precise about it, 283 Protestants for refusing to give up their faith. And this is a really terrible spectacle for people to see. So by the time Elizabeth takes over the country, and Elizabeth is a Protestant, she has been brought up a Protestant, under her, England is going to become a Protestant country. By the time Elizabeth takes the throne, she's got a country that's very divided, where people disagree with each other about their beliefs, and they disagree with what the kings and the queens have done, and they've seen some terrible things and some very, very awful times because of this. So that's another problem that she has to contend with. So Elizabeth has to deal with religious instability on top of economic instability, on top of financial problems when she becomes queen. Finally, she also has to deal with some significant threats from other countries. So if we come down here, I've drawn a map. You'll see that I've put flags on the countries on this map. Those are actually anachronistic. Those flags didn't exist at this time. I did think about looking up the actual flags that they had, but then I thought there was no point because none of us would recognise them. So one of the biggest threats to English security is France. France is bigger than England, it's got a bigger population, it's richer, and it is England's old enemy, they have been fighting for a really long time. It has an alliance, and a very long-standing alliance, with another one of England's old enemies, which is Scotland. This is actually called the Old Alliance. So there we go. But that's uncomfortable for England because it means it's got enemies on both sides of it. And Scotland, because the Scottish border is so far north, it's actually really difficult to keep an eye on what the Scottish are doing and to ensure that that stays safe. So that's a problem. Now, to make this even better, before Elizabeth became queen, her sister Mary had gone to war with the French and lost. So in 1559, England has to sign a treaty with France to bring that war to an end. And wish me luck with my pronunciation, but here we go. This is called the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis. So the Treaty of Cateau-Cambrésis. Spelt Cambresis. So there we go. Now, under this treaty, France demands the return of a little port town called Calais, because England has owned Calais since the year 1347. And it's handy for the British because it's a trading post, and it also means that they can keep troops actually right next to France. But so losing it is a really terrible blow, and it's very humiliating for the English, and they are very upset about it. So one of Elizabeth's most important foreign policy aims as queen after that is trying to get Calais back and trying to make Calais English again. There's another problem because during this war that England had with France, France was also at war with Spain. That was why England got involved, because Mary was married to the Spanish king. However, by Elizabeth's reign, they have stopped fighting. And they actually have some things in common, because France is a Catholic country, Spain is a Catholic country. England, once Elizabeth has taken over, is not a Catholic country, but Scotland is. So there's a further threat that France and Spain might decide that they have more in common than they thought, and they might form an alliance against England as well. So Elizabeth has all these concerns to contend with when she becomes queen, as well as this person. If I can find it. There she is. This is Mary, Queen of Scots. She's not to be confused, although everybody does confuse them, with Elizabeth's sister Mary. And one really big important difference at this point is that by the time Elizabeth becomes queen, Mary is dead, whereas Mary, Queen of Scots, is not. So Elizabeth has a sister called Mary. She also has a sort of second cousin called Mary, because Henry had a sister called Margaret, who married the King of Scotland, who was called James IV of Scotland. And they have a son, who is James V of Scotland. And he has a daughter who is Mary, Queen of Scots, and she is the Queen of Scotland, as well as which she's married to the French king, who's called Francis II. He becomes King of France in 1559. So this old alliance in play. So Mary, Queen of Scots, is in Scotland. She's married to the King of France. And when Mary, not Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's sister Mary, when Elizabeth's sister Mary died, Mary, Queen of Scots, declared herself the legitimate heir to the English throne. And she is actually related, if you go back. Her grandmother was Henry VIII's sister. So she is related to the family. And the big problem here for Elizabeth is that Mary, Queen of Scots, as well as having a legitimate claim to the throne, is also a Catholic. So all the Catholics in the country who don't necessarily want a Protestant queen and don't really want Elizabeth to be queen and don't think that Elizabeth is legitimate anyway, might look at Mary, Queen of Scots, and see her as a better alternative. Mary, Queen of Scots actually has French troops in Scotland. They're being looked after by her mother, whose name is Mary of Guise. So Elizabeth has another contender to the throne to deal with, on top of all her other problems. So when she became queen in 1558, Elizabeth had a lot of trouble and mess to start clearing up.